I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into the house. Saffron wasn't at the door to greet me. Normally, the second I opened the door, she'd rush up, wagging her tail so hard it looked like it might lift her off the ground. But that evening, the house was too quiet, and the absence of her little greeting felt like a knot tightening in my chest. "Tom," I called out to my husband, dropping my bag and stepping cautiously into the living room. I found him there, crouched by Saffron's favorite spot on the couch, his face a storm of concern. And there she was, our scrappy, bright-eyed mutt, lying still and breathing in shallow, shaky pants. "I tried to get her up," Tom said, his voice low and tight. "She just whimpered." Panic clawed its way up my throat, but I swallowed it down. We bundled her into the car and drove to the emergency vet, a heavy silence filling the space between us. Saffron lay curled on my lap, her body warm but trembling slightly, as if she could feel the undercurrent of our fear. The vet's diagnosis came swiftly: a tumor pressing against her spine. Operable, but not without complications. "The surgery is extensive," the vet said, her expression kind but firm, "and the recovery will be challenging. She'll need constant care for weeks, maybe months. Physical therapy, medications, frequent checkups." I nodded automatically, already counting the ways we could rearrange our schedules and finances to make it work. Tom, however, sat back in his chair, arms crossed, his brow furrowed deeply. I knew that look. It was his practical hat slipping on, the one he wore when he thought I was about to make an emotional decision. In the car, he broke the silence. "We need to think about this." "I am thinking," I shot back. "She's only 5, Tom. 5. She could have years ahead of her." "But what kind of years?" he countered. "Stuck in a crate, dragging herself around until she can't anymore? What if the surgery doesn't even work?" His words hit like a slap, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. "So what?" I said finally. "We just give up? She's been there for us every step of the way, and now, when she needs us?" "That's not what I'm saying." His voice was weary, like he'd already rehearsed this argument in his head. "But you're acting like this is simple." "It's not. We have to think about what's right for her, not just what makes us feel better." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Tom adored Saffron. He was the one who insisted we adopt her when we found her as a stray, matted and skinny and bounding toward us like she'd known us her whole life. He was the one who taught her to sit, to roll over, to bark on command in exchange for endless peanut butter treats. And now he was suggesting we, what? Let her go because it was too hard? That night, I sat on the floor next to Saffron's bed, stroking her fur and whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. "We'll get through this, girl," I murmured. "We'll figure it out." Tom hovered in the doorway, watching us. "You really think she's up for this?" I looked down at her. Even in her pain, she shifted slightly to rest her chin on my knee, her eyes meeting mine with that unwavering trust that made my heart ache. "Yeah," I said softly, "I think she is." The next day, we met with the vet again. This time, Tom was armed with questions. What if the surgery failed? What if her recovery plateaued? What would her quality of life look like? The vet answered patiently, but I could see Tom's skepticism growing with each response. When we got home, the conversation exploded. "You're not the one who's going to have to carry her up and down the stairs every day," he said, his voice rising. "You're not the one who's going to be home 24/7 for weeks while she recovers. I love her too, but this isn't just about love, it's about reality. Don't you dare act like this is easy for me." I shot back. "I'd carry her 1,000 stairs if it meant giving her a chance. And if it doesn't work? If we put her through hell, and it's all for nothing? How do you live with that?" The question hung in the air, a thunderclap in our already stormy kitchen. I opened my mouth to argue, but the truth of it made my throat close up. Because I didn't know. I didn't have an answer for that. That night, we slept in shifts on the floor beside Saffron. Neither of us said it, but I knew we were both hoping for some kind of sign, some clarity about what to do. Around 3 a.m., I woke to find Tom sitting cross-legged beside her, his hand resting on her paw, his head bowed as if in prayer. "She deserves a shot, doesn't she?" he said quietly, not looking up. I reached out, resting my hand on his shoulder. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "She does." We decided to go through with the surgery, but not without fear or doubt. Over the next few weeks, our lives revolved around Saffron's recovery. There were setbacks, long nights of soothing her when she whimpered in pain, days when I questioned whether we'd made the right call. Tom threw himself into the care plan with a focus I hadn't expected, building her a ramp for the backyard, learning how to do her physical therapy exercises. And through it all, Saffron surprised us. She met every challenge with the same scrappy determination that had won our hearts from the beginning. The first time she wagged her tail again, even just a little, I cried so hard I thought I might never stop. Tom laughed at me, but I caught him wiping his eyes too. Now, months later, Saffron's not back to her old self yet, but she's getting there. She's chasing squirrels again, slower but just as determined, and the spark in her eyes is brighter than ever. Tom and I still argue sometimes, still second-guess our choices, but in the quiet moments, when Saffron curls up between us and sighs contentedly, I think we both know we did right by her. Still, there's a nagging thought I can't shake, and I need to hear it from someone else. AITA? It all started with a single, innocuous post-it note stuck to the bathroom mirror. "Don't make plans for Saturday. Trust me." No signature, no explanation. Just that cryptic scrawl in green ink, which could only mean one thing. It was from Jamie. Jamie was the planner in our duo, the one who turned random Tuesdays into adventures and had a knack for making every birthday or anniversary feel like a movie montage. And because I knew Jamie's surprises were never half-baked, I took the note to heart and kept Saturday wide open. What Jamie didn't know, though, was that I'd been scheming too. 3 months earlier, I'd stumbled on a picture of us tucked in a dog-eared travel guide from college. It was a snapshot of Jamie holding a cone of gelato, the Eiffel Tower behind them, laughing because I'd accidentally ordered sorbet à l'al, garlic sorbet. That trip had been our last big hurrah before life swallowed us whole with jobs, bills, and the general chaos of adulthood. Seeing it made me realize how much I missed the way we used to celebrate each other with reckless joy. So, I set my own plan into motion. A surprise dinner on the rooftop of the building where we'd had our first kiss, complete with a string quartet and a menu recreated from our favorite meals over the years. Saturday arrived, and I was practically vibrating with anticipation. I'd already double-checked the catering, texted the musicians, and slipped the building manager a nice bottle of wine to ensure the rooftop stayed private. Jamie, oblivious, was buzzing too, though in a different way. "You're going to lose it," they said over breakfast, their eyes glinting with the kind of excitement usually reserved for Christmas mornings. "Just wait." We both played our roles perfectly, me pretending to be clueless, Jamie acting like the world's most mysterious mastermind. It wasn't until Jamie handed me a blindfold that I started to worry. What's this for?" I asked. "You'll see." Jamie grinned, waving off my hesitation. "Trust me." With the blindfold securely in place, I let Jamie guide me outside and into what felt like a car. The engine hummed to life, and soon we were speeding along what I guessed was the highway. I tried to relax, but my mind was racing. Jamie had surprises before, but this one felt elaborate. Was I overdressed? Should I have brought a sweater? Did Jamie's plan somehow involve wild animals? After what felt like an eternity, the car stopped. Jamie helped me out and removed the blindfold, revealing a stunning, secluded meadow dotted with wildflowers. A small trail of lanterns led to a clearing where a hot air balloon stood tethered, its vibrant colors glowing against the fading daylight. My heart lurched. "Jamie, what is this?" "Your adventure," they said, beaming. As magical as it was, my stomach twisted with guilt. I'd spent months crafting the perfect evening, and now, there was no way we'd make it back to the rooftop in time. "This is amazing," I managed, forcing a smile. "But I might have something planned too." Jamie's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" So, I told them. About the rooftop, the musicians, the painstakingly chosen dishes. For a moment, they just stood there, blinking at me as the enormity of the situation sank in. 2 people, 1 night, two meticulously planned surprises that were completely incompatible. "Well, this is awkward," Jamie said, rubbing the back of their neck. "I thought I was the romantic one." "You are." I insisted. "It's just, I wanted to do something special for you too." We stared at each other, caught in a standoff of well-intentioned love. The wind tugged at the edges of Jamie's scarf, and in the distance, the balloon operator waved at us, clearly wondering if we were going to bail. Finally, Jamie sighed. "Okay, hear me out. What if we do this my way tonight, and your way tomorrow? You can't exactly reschedule a balloon ride. And you can't exactly ask a string quartet to hang out on a rooftop 2 nights in a row," I countered. "Fair point," Jamie admitted. Compromise. Compromise. We ended up blending the plans in the most chaotic, unforgettable way. The balloon operator, who turned out to be a surprisingly good sport, let us bring some of the catered food aboard. So, instead of a refined rooftop dinner, we had a slightly tipsy picnic 2,000 feet in the air, to the sound of a Bluetooth speaker playing poorly buffered classical music. Jamie laughed so hard when the wind almost blew a tiramisu into my face that they nearly tipped over the wine bottle. Later, back on solid ground, we raced to the rooftop just in time to catch the quartet packing up. When I explained the situation, they grinned and played an encore just for us, under the glow of the city lights. The night was messy, unconventional, and nothing like either of us had envisioned. But as Jamie rested their head on my shoulder, their hand in mine, I realized it was perfect in a way neither of us could have planned. Still, as we finished the last bites of cold tiramisu, Jamie looked at me and smirked. "So, between the two of us, who nailed it better?" I grinned. "Oh, it's me. No contest. AITA." It started with a lunchbox. Not mine, of course. I'm not the kind of person who packs cute little bento meals for work. It was Abigail's. Abigail, my coworker and unofficial office sunshine, brought her kale quinoa something or other every day in a glass container with those little silicone compartments. She'd sit at the lunch table, daintily unwrapping her napkin like she was unboxing a Faberge egg, and somehow even her forkfuls were picturesque. Last Tuesday, though, Abigail wasn't herself. She barely touched her kale quinoa whatever, and her usual chipper comments about her cat's antics were replaced with an ominous silence. She kept glancing at her phone, frowning at something she wasn't sharing. Being the helpful colleague that I am, I leaned over and asked, "Everything okay, Abigail?" She hesitated. "Oh, it's just family stuff." Classic deflection. I wasn't going to push her yet, but I started mentally cataloging possibilities. Sibling drama? Parental health issues? Financial trouble? It wasn't nosiness, per se, but a sense of responsibility. Abigail was the office glue. If she unraveled, the team morale would tank, and who was going to organize the birthday cupcakes? The next day, Abigail didn't come in. No kale quinoa anything, no cheerful good morning everyone. Just an empty desk with a faint whiff of her lavender hand lotion lingering like a ghost. When I texted her to check in, she replied with a short, cryptic message. "Thanks for asking, but I'm fine. Just taking some personal days." Personal days. That was code for something's very wrong. That night, I started sleuthing. I didn't even have to try hard. A quick scroll through her Instagram stories revealed a photo of her sister, her identical twin sister, smiling on some kind of retreat, tagged with hashtags like #HealingJourney and #FindingPeace. The caption read, "We're taking it one day at a time. Family above all." Aha, it was a twin thing. Maybe her sister was in trouble. Abigail had mentioned her twin once during a team trivia night, describing her as wild and free-spirited in a way that made it sound like both a compliment and a warning. I decided then and there that Abigail wasn't going to deal with whatever chaos was brewing alone. After all, isn't that what friends, work friends at least, are for? My first brilliant move was reaching out to Abigail's twin, Cassandra. It took me an hour of scrolling through Abigail's tagged photos to find her full name, and another 10 minutes of light internet sleuthing to locate her LinkedIn. Hey, everyone knows LinkedIn is basically public. I sent her a carefully crafted message. "Hi Cassandra, you don't know me, but I'm a coworker of Abigail's, and I just wanted to say I hope everything's okay." She mentioned taking time off for family reasons, and we're all rooting for her. I figured it was non-intrusive enough. Friendly, supportive, practically saintly. Cassandra didn't respond directly, but the next morning, Abigail did. She called me. Not texted, called. When I picked up, she didn't even say hello. "Did you contact my sister?" I paused. Yes, just to check in. You seemed really down, and I wanted to make sure. You had no right to do that. Abigail's voice was sharp, angrier than I'd ever heard it. "I'm dealing with something personal, and I didn't ask for your help. I was just trying to support you," I argued. "You're always there for everyone else. Why can't we be there for you?" "Because it's not your business," she snapped. Then, before I could reply, she hung up. Now, at this point, a normal person might have taken the hint. But me? I wasn't about to let her drown in whatever mess her sister had dragged her into. Clearly, Abigail didn't want to talk about it, which meant it was up to me to help her indirectly. So, I dug deeper. I started with Cassandra's Instagram. Most of her posts were vaguely artsy shots of beaches or forests with captions about healing energy and toxic cycles. But buried among them was a photo of a man. Dark-haired, tattooed, brooding. The kind of guy who probably smoked clove cigarettes and played the guitar badly. The caption was telling. "Some journeys you have to take alone. Grateful for the lessons." Abigail had mentioned once, in passing, that her sister dated questionable guys. This had to be one of them. It took another hour of light stalking, but I tracked him down too. His name was Marcus, and his Facebook profile, shockingly not private, was a goldmine of melodrama. Cryptic song lyrics, vague posts about heartbreak, and the occasional meme about loyalty. I sent him a message, too. "Hi, Marcus. You don't know me, but I'm a friend of Cassandra's sister. I just wanted to say that if you're going through something, there are resources that can help. Maybe consider reaching out to her family?" Marcus didn't reply either. Instead, 2 days later, Abigail confronted me in the office parking lot. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she hissed, jabbing a finger at me. "You contacted Marcus?" I blinked. "How did you?" "Because Cassandra told me." He told her. "Do you have any idea how much damage you've done?" He thought Cassandra sent you. So now she's furious with me for talking about him, even though I didn't. "I was trying to help," I said, genuinely bewildered by her anger. It seemed like he might be part of the problem. "You're the problem," she yelled. "You couldn't leave it alone. You turned my personal life into your pet project." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but she cut me off. "You think you're helping, but you're just making everything worse. You don't even know what's going on, and you're acting like you're some kind of savior. You've completely overstepped." Then she walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling somehow both justified and mortified. I thought about it all night. Maybe I had crossed a line, but wasn't it better than doing nothing? If someone's drowning, you don't stand on the shore waiting for them to ask for a life preserver. You throw it, and if it hits them in the face, well, at least you tried. So now I'm asking you, internet strangers, AITA? Last Thursday night was supposed to be a low-key affair. Just a few drinks at Mason's, a dive bar with sticky floors and cheap whiskey, with my boyfriend Leo and our mutual friend Tessa. The three of us had been thick as thieves for years, practically a sitcom trio. But if our friendship were a sitcom, this episode would have been titled The Night the Mask Slipped. It started when Leo was bragging about the mural he'd been commissioned to paint downtown. He was mid-sentence about how the city council personally reached out to him when Tessa snorted. Not a full laugh, mind you, but one of those sharp, derisive exhales that cuts through conversations like a razor. Leo paused, his glass halfway to his lips. "Something funny, Tess?" Her face twisted into the kind of smirk I'd seen 1,000 times, but never quite learned to predict. "No, I just think it's cute how you make it sound like they begged you. Didn't you submit, like, 5 proposals and not hear back for months? Pretty sure that's the opposite of personal outreach." The air thickened. Leo raised an eyebrow, slow and deliberate. "And yet," he said, setting his glass down with a thud, "they picked mine. I guess even after 5 tries, I'm still more memorable than whatever it is you're working on these days." Oh no, this was the thing with them. On the surface, it was just banter. But if you squinted, you'd see the jagged, unresolved history they shared. The whispered stories neither ever told me outright, but that I pieced together from years of offhand comments and suspicious tension. And here they were, spiraling back into it. Tessa leaned forward, resting her chin on her palm. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with venom. "I forgot you're the arbiter of what counts as memorable. Remind me, how's that Etsy shop you tried running last year? You know, the one that shut down after 2 months?" Leo's jaw tightened. "Wow," he said, "I guess failure's a big topic for you, huh? What's it like being an unpaid intern at 30? My stomach churned, but for some godforsaken reason, I decided to intervene. I thought I was being funny. Okay, I said, holding up my hands like a referee. Leo has his mural, Tessa has her internship. Let's not measure egos here. The bar's already pretty low. I meant it as a joke. Really, I did. But the second the words left my mouth, I realized I had very much miscalculated. Both of them turned to me, their gazes so icy I could feel the frostbite forming. Tessa pounced first. "Wow, thanks, Ray. Love the support. I guess your job at freelance graphic designer extraordinaire qualifies you to judge people now." "Yeah," Leo added, his voice low and cutting. "Not everyone has the luxury of working in sweatpants and ghosting their clients for 3 days." "I don't ghost my clients," I snapped, even though I absolutely had. "And at least I'm not still relying on my parents to fund my art supplies like some people." "Oh, here we go," Leo said, throwing up his hands. "I knew you'd bring that up. You know what? Sorry I didn't inherit a trust fund like Tessa here." Tessa gasped. "Excuse me? My inheritance barely covered my student loans, and you know it. Don't try to drag me into whatever financial guilt complex you two are working out." "Financial guilt complex?" Leo said, his voice rising. "At least I'm not spending daddy's money to rent a studio I never use." "Wow, Leo," I said, rolling my eyes. Big words for someone who begged me to pay his tab last month. The table fell silent. All around us, the low hum of bar chatter continued, oblivious to the volcano erupting in our corner. Leo's face darkened. "You're really bringing that up?" "Yeah, I am," I shot back, feeling the heat rise in my chest. "Because I'm tired of you acting like you're so much better than everyone when half the time you can't even cover your own bills." Tessa let out a sharp laugh. "Oh my God, this is amazing. You two are actually worse than I thought. It's like watching a car crash but with more delusion." "Oh, don't even start," I snapped, turning to her. "You've been bitter ever since Leo got the mural gig, and you can't stand that someone's finally paying attention to him instead of you." Her smile dropped, replaced by something harder, colder. "Are you seriously accusing me of being jealous of Leo? That's hilarious, Ray, considering you're the one who's clearly terrified he's going to outshine you." "I'm not terrified," I said, slamming my glass down. "I'm just sick of both of you pretending like you're not constantly trying to one-up each other. It's exhausting." "Oh, we're exhausting?" Leo said, his voice dripping with incredulity. "Says the person who made her entire personality about mediating our arguments. What's the matter, Ray? Feeling irrelevant now that we're not letting you play referee? God, you're such a narcissist," Tessa said, throwing her hands in the air. "You think everything revolves around you. Newsflash. Not everyone wants to sleep with you or hear about your stupid mural." And there it was. The line we'd all been dancing around finally cracked open like a fault line, leaving the room silent and still. I stared at her, then at Leo, whose face was an unreadable mask of anger and hurt. Without another word, Tessa grabbed her bag and stormed out, her heels clicking angrily against the sticky floor. Leo didn't even watch her go. Instead, he stood up slowly, tossing a crumpled 20 on the table. "Thanks for the vote of confidence, Ray," he said quietly, not even looking at me. "Don't wait up." And just like that, I was alone, sitting in a puddle of spilled beer and shattered egos, wondering how the hell everything had unraveled so quickly. So, AITA? The rain outside the train station had settled into a lazy drizzle, drops sliding down the windows like tears. The platform smelled of damp newspapers and stale coffee, and the sound of hurried footsteps on wet tiles echoed everywhere. It was the kind of night that made you feel invisible, no matter how many people you passed. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not on this night, not under these circumstances. But I was, with a worn envelope tucked into my jacket and a small suitcase rolling behind me, its squeaky wheel narrating my steps. There was a reason I hadn't opened the envelope yet. Something about the weight of it in my pocket told me that once I read the contents, there'd be no going back. My sister had slipped it into my hands that morning, her face pale, her lips trembling. "I can't explain," she'd said, "but if you love me, you'll go." The word go had hung heavy in the air between us. I tried to press her for more, but she wouldn't budge, just shoved the envelope into my hand and gave me a look that told me not to ask questions I didn't want answers to. Now here I was, watching the trains slide in and out of the station like beasts in a zoo. Their mechanical roars seemed to drown out my thoughts, which was a mercy because they weren't pleasant ones. I decided, finally, to open the envelope. My fingers were clumsy with the wet paper, but I managed to pull out a single sheet, the words scrawled in my sister's handwriting. Carriage 7, Seat 14. Don't talk to anyone who offers you an apple, especially not a green one. I blinked at the note, my pulse quickening. Apples? What was she on about? This wasn't a fairy tale, but my sister had always been strange, seeing patterns in things no one else noticed, connecting dots that seemed random to everyone else. She was rarely wrong, though. With a sigh, I stuffed the note back into my jacket and boarded the train. The interior was dim, lit with overhead lights that buzzed softly. It was quieter than I'd expected, the kind of quiet that prickled at your skin. Carriage 7 wasn't far, and when I found seat 14, I sat down, my suitcase tucked beneath me. The train jolted forward, and the world outside blurred into streaks of black and yellow. For a moment, I felt the tension ease. Maybe this was just a wild goose chase, a harmless game. Then, he appeared. A man in a gray suit, his face obscured by the brim of a hat. He carried a briefcase and walked slowly down the aisle, pausing at each seat like he was studying the passengers. When he reached me, he stopped. "You dropped this," he said, holding out an apple. "A green one." I shook my head, my heart pounding. "No, that's not mine." His lips curled into a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Are you sure?" "Positive." He tilted his head, studying me for a moment before shrugging and moving on. My throat tightened as I watched him disappear into the next carriage. When I looked around, I realized the other passengers hadn't reacted to him at all. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time felt strange on this train. Outside the window, the scenery didn't look like the countryside or suburbs. It was all wrong. The trees twisted unnaturally, their branches curling like claws. The sky was a deep, oppressive gray, though it had been night when I boarded. I wasn't alone anymore. A girl across the aisle was staring at me, her eyes wide and unblinking. She clutched a red apple in her hands, her fingers trembling. When I caught her gaze, she opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she stood abruptly and moved toward the back of the carriage. That's when I noticed her seat. Seat 14. My seat. A low hum filled the air, growing louder, vibrating through my bones. The train was speeding up. My suitcase toppled over, spilling its contents across the floor. As I bent to pick it up, a small card slid out, a playing card. The Queen of Spades. But her face was scratched out, replaced with an apple. A green one. The train screeched, the lights flickered, and when I looked up, the girl with the red apple was gone. So was everyone else. The carriage was empty, and on the seat where she'd been sitting was a single green apple. The train wasn't stopping. It wasn't even on tracks anymore. Outside, the world had dissolved into swirling colors, shapes folding in on themselves like a kaleidoscope gone rogue. My pulse raced as I clutched the envelope, the only tether I had to reality. The note inside was different now. Same handwriting, different words. Don't let it bite you. And that's when the apple rolled toward me, splitting open down the middle to reveal rows of sharp, gleaming teeth. I was halfway through painting the mural in Adam's apartment when the argument started. Well, technically it wasn't an argument, Just Adam sighing dramatically from across the room, which is his signature move when he's about to critique something. This time, he was standing with his arms crossed, scrutinizing my half-finished masterpiece like I just spray-painted "Live, Laugh, Love" in neon pink across his wall. "You don't like it," I said, not bothering to look at him. My brush hovered mid-stroke, poised to finish the curve of a fox's tail winding into a tree branch. "It's not that," he said, which is exactly what people say when it's absolutely that. "It's just, are you sure this is the vibe?" I turned to him, still clutching the brush. "The vibe?" I repeated, incredulous. "You asked me to help you make this place feel more alive. This is alive. Look at the fox. He's practically winking at you." Adam tilted his head, unimpressed. "It's just a lot. Like, I was thinking maybe some clean geometric shapes? Maybe a few tasteful splashes of color? You wanted tasteful?" "Adam, I'm painting a fox lounging in a mystical forest, not a tech startup logo." To understand why I was even in this situation, you'd need to know that Adam was my best friend, and he'd been going through what he dramatically called his gray period. His life had gotten stuck in a loop. Dull job, dull apartment, dull everything. He told me he wanted a change, something bold and exciting to remind him that life wasn't just spreadsheets and meal prepping. I'd offered to help, and when I said, "I'll make your apartment magical," he said, "Do whatever you want." So, I did. I spent days sketching out a fantastical woodland scene sprawling across his main living room wall. A fox curled up under a crescent moon, fireflies dancing around glowing mushrooms, gnarled trees that twisted into the shapes of strange creatures. It was lush, vibrant, and full of whimsy. Everything Adam's life was currently not. And now, 3 days into painting, he was looking at it like I'd brought chaos into his precious little beige universe. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "What exactly about this bothers you? Is it the fox? The mushrooms? The literal magic?" "It's not bothering me," he insisted. "I just didn't expect it to be so, overwhelming." "Overwhelming," I repeated, deadpan. "You asked me to bring life into your apartment. Life is overwhelming. That's kind of the point." Adam hesitated, clearly trying to find a way to soften the blow. "I just don't think I was ready for this big of a statement." It hit me then. He wasn't rejecting the mural because he hated it. He was rejecting it because it wasn't safe. He'd wanted a change, but not the kind that demanded anything of him. Not the kind that made his walls roar with creativity every time he walked in. He wanted transformation, but only the kind that could be erased if it got too scary. Still, the critique stung. I'd poured myself into this. Every brushstroke, every detail. It wasn't just paint on a wall. It was an extension of me, of what I thought he needed, of what I wanted to give him. And now, he was telling me it was too much. "Okay," I said, setting the brush down. "Let's make it less overwhelming. What do you want me to do? Paint over it? Maybe some triangles and tasteful beige lines? Would that make it better?" Adam frowned. "You don't have to be sarcastic." "I'm not being sarcastic," I shot back. "I'm genuinely asking. What do you want from me, Adam? Because right now, it feels like you asked me for help, and now you're blaming me for actually trying." "I'm not blaming you," he said, but his voice was defensive. "I just think maybe you should have checked with me before going all out." I stared at him, the words sinking in. "You told me to do whatever I wanted." I didn't mean literally anything. My chest tightened, a mix of anger and hurt bubbling up. So what? I'm the bad guy now for trying too hard? For caring too much? Because that's what this is, Adam. I wasn't doing this for me. I was doing it for you. To give you something you couldn't even imagine because you've been stuck in the same rut for years. "That's not fair," he muttered, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Not fair?" I laughed bitterly. "You know what's not fair? Spending days of my life trying to give you something beautiful and having you act like it's some personal attack. You want change, but only if it's the kind you can micromanage. Well, newsflash, Adam, life doesn't work like that." There was a long, heavy silence. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking torn. I half hoped he'd apologize, or at least admit I was right. But instead, he said quietly, "Maybe I just don't know how to handle all this." His words deflated me. I wanted to stay angry, but the way he said it, so vulnerable, like a kid caught in a storm, made my frustration soften just a little. Adam, I said, my voice gentler now, you don't have to handle it. You just have to let it be. Let it be messy, wild, overwhelming. That's how things grow. He didn't say anything for a while, just stood there, staring at the fox. Finally, he sighed again. But this time it sounded more like surrender than critique. Okay, he said. Leave the fox. And the mushrooms. Really? He nodded, though he still looked like he was bracing for impact. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I need to get used to things being alive. I didn't smile, but I felt something loosen in my chest. I picked up the brush and turned back to the mural, finishing the curve of the fox's tail. For now, it was enough. Still, I couldn't shake the question lingering in my mind as I worked. AITA? Every family has its traditions, and mine is no different. For us, it's pasta night. Every last Saturday of the month, we gather at Nana's house. It's a sacred ritual of fresh tagliatelle, Nana's secret marinara recipe, and at least 3 passive-aggressive arguments served on the side. This month, though, I'd been eyeing an event downtown, a pop-up dining experience hosted by a Michelin-starred chef from Italy. Authentic Sicilian cuisine, reinvented, limited seating, a one-night-only culinary masterpiece. How could I say no? The idea came to me in a flash of inspiration while chopping vegetables for my usual Thursday salad. What if pasta night wasn't at Nana's this month? What if, just this once, we did something different? I could already picture my family marveling at the artistry of saffron-infused pasta and hand-pulled mozzarella. A break from the routine might even spark some joy. Nana would love it, right? I mean, she's Italian. She'd appreciate the artistry. And if anyone resisted, well, I'd just keep it a surprise until we got there. The first step was logistics. The pop-up was reservation only, and when I called, there were only 6 spots left. Perfect for our group. I booked them all without a second thought. Then, with the finesse of a seasoned diplomat, I texted everyone, "Hey fam, this month's pasta night is going to be special. Nana's getting the night off. Trust me, it'll be amazing. Just meet at my place at 6 p.m. Dress up a little." I didn't wait for responses. Honestly, I didn't want to. Ignorance is bliss, and I was confident they'd thank me later. Saturday arrived, and I prepped my apartment like a covert ops HQ. I knew there'd be questions the moment they walked through the door, but my plan was bulletproof. Nana was the first to arrive, clutching her casserole dish like a talisman. "What's this about, Bella? I already made the sauce." I smiled and gently pried the dish from her hands. "Tonight's different, Nana. No cooking, no stress. It's all taken care of. You'll love it." The others trickled in, my parents, my older brother Luca and his fiancée Angela, each looking mildly suspicious. "Where's the kitchen chaos?" Luca asked, sniffing the air. "It doesn't smell like pasta night in here." I shooed them toward the door before they could investigate further. The pop-up was tucked into a hidden courtyard downtown, lit with string lights and a glowing sign that read, "Sapori Rivoluzionari." Inside, the chef himself greeted us with a flourish, and the air smelled like truffle heaven. I could feel the tension in my family beginning to thaw as we were seated at a long, rustic table. Nana seemed intrigued, even if she did mutter something under her breath about how they were probably overcharging for bread. The first course arrived, a deconstructed caprese salad, artfully plated with edible flowers and balsamic pearls. Nana stared at it like it was an alien autopsy. "What's this?" she whispered to me. "It's art," I whispered back. She poked at the mozzarella with her fork, clearly unimpressed. As the courses progressed, I realized that the gap between my vision and reality was wider than I'd anticipated. My dad refused to eat the squid ink pasta because it looked like it had been left in a chimney. Luca kept asking where the meatballs were, even after I explained that Sicilian cuisine didn't traditionally serve them with pasta. Angela, who never eats carbs anyway, was living off sips of sparkling water and disapproving glances. And Nana? Nana was the wild card. She didn't complain outright, but the looks she gave the chef could have turned prosciutto to ash. Then came the dessert. The chef presented it himself. Reimagined cannoli, with lavender ricotta and a pistachio tuile. Nana broke her silence. "That's not a cannoli," she said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. The chef froze mid-sentence, clearly unprepared for this level of critique. Nana continued, her voice rising. "Cannoli is cream, not this nonsense." She gestured at the plate like it had personally offended her. I tried to interject, but Nana was on a roll now. "Where's the crust? The chocolate chips? This is not Sicilian. This is..." She paused, searching for the right insult, and finally settled on French. The word dripped with disdain. By the time we left, the chef looked like he might cry. My family piled into the car in silence, everyone's mood soured. At home, Nana retrieved her casserole dish from the fridge. She heated it up without a word and ladled the marinara over store-bought spaghetti. We sat around her dining table, still in our fancy clothes, and ate like it was awake. As I twirled my fork through Nana's sauce, I couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. Sure, the pop-up had been a disaster, but wasn't it the thought that counted? I tried to elevate the experience, to show them something new. They didn't appreciate it, but was that my fault? Or were they just stuck in their ways? Nana slapped a piece of garlic bread onto my plate, her expression softening. "Next time," she said, "leave the cannoli to me." "So, AITA?" The scent of rosemary lingered in the air as the clock struck midnight. In a quiet seaside town, a small bookshop called The Gilded Quill stood at the edge of the pier. It was a peculiar place, where books seemed to hum with a quiet life of their own. Locals swore the shop was alive. Lights flickered at odd hours, and some said they'd seen books rearranging themselves on the shelves as though deciding where they belonged. No one lingered after closing time, except for Mara. Mara, the owner, was no ordinary bookseller. Her hair shimmered faintly as though catching light that wasn't there, and her eyes were pools of liquid onyx, reflecting things unseen. She never spoke about her past, though townsfolk whispered about a shipwreck years ago and a lone survivor pulled from the icy depths. Mara never confirmed or denied the rumors, which only added to her mystery. But tonight, she was not alone. A stranger had entered the shop moments before closing. He was tall, with a patchwork coat of mismatched fabrics, and carried an air of displacement, like a traveler who had forgotten where he was going. He didn't speak at first, simply browsed the aisles, fingers grazing the spines of books that flinched ever so slightly under his touch. Finally, he turned to Mara, his voice low and deliberate. "Do you have a book that's been waiting for me?" Mara didn't ask questions. She tilted her head, studying him as though measuring something invisible, then turned toward the back of the shop. The stranger followed. The farther they walked, the more the shelves seemed to close in, the air thick with the smell of old paper and salt water. She stopped before a single book, bound in dark leather and embossed with no title. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. "Are you certain you want this?" she asked, her voice tinged with something between caution and curiosity. The stranger smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've been looking for it for longer than you can imagine." Mara handed him the book. The moment it touched his hands, the shop seemed to exhale, a shudder running through the shelves. The stranger opened it, and for the briefest moment, Mara glimpsed the pages. Not words, but shadows that moved and writhed as though alive. "What's your price?" he asked. Mara hesitated. "The book takes its own payment." The stranger nodded as if this were expected. He tucked the book under his arm, thanked her, and left without another word. The door closed, and the shop grew eerily still. Mara stared after him, her chest tight. She knew better than to meddle with travelers like him, but something about the encounter gnawed at her. She turned back to the shelf, only to find it empty, utterly barren, as though the book had never been there at all. That night, the sea was restless. Waves crashed against the pier, the wind carrying whispers that seemed to speak her name. Mara locked the shop, but sleep eluded her. The stranger's presence lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. When dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight revealed something chilling. Footprints, wet and uneven, leading from the ocean to her shop door. She checked the lock. It was still secure. Yet when she stepped inside, The air was thick with the unmistakable tang of salt. Her shelves were undisturbed, save for one. A single book sat where none had been before, bound in black and emanating a faint hum. The title glimmered faintly. The Price of Return? Mara's hands trembled as she reached for it, the weight of the stranger's visit heavy in her mind. She opened the book, and the room seemed to tilt, pulling her into its pages. The words danced and shifted, telling a story she had tried to bury. A shipwreck, a storm, a desperate bargain with the sea itself. And then, a warning, the debt is not yet paid. Mara staggered back, her breath ragged. The shop quivered around her, as though alive, its shelves groaning in protest. The whispers outside grew louder, insistent. She closed the book, her mind racing. Who was the stranger? Why had the book returned? But she knew the answer deep down. The book was a mirror, showing her the price of what she had taken from the sea. And now, the sea was calling her back. The tide was high that evening when she stepped onto the pier. The stranger stood at the edge, the book cradled in his hands. He didn't speak, but his eyes bore into hers, full of understanding and sorrow. Mara approached, the waves licking at her feet as if welcoming an old friend. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded. The sea roared and the wind howled, but Mara felt strangely calm. The stranger extended the book, and as she took it, the world dissolved into a swirling mist of salt and shadow. The pier was empty by morning, save for a single book resting on the wooden planks, its title obscured by a thin layer of frost. And so, the Gilded Quill closed its doors for good. Some say the shop disappeared entirely, swallowed by the sea. Others claim it still appears on stormy nights, a beacon for lost souls seeking stories they shouldn't dare to read. But those who enter are warned. Every book has a price, and some debts can never be forgiven. Last Saturday, the wind whipped through the cracks in the diner door, carrying in the scent of rain and late autumn. I was sitting at a corner booth with my co-workers from the bookstore, Maya, Kyle, and Jenna. It was our usual post-shift wind down, a sacred ritual of fries, milkshakes, and unloading about the day's bizarre customers. Kyle was midway through an impersonation of a man who insisted Jane Austen ghost-wrote The Lord of the Rings when Maya turned to me, smirking. "So, what's up with your sister? She's been looking all mysterious lately," Maya teased, twirling a fry in ketchup like she was stirring tea. "Got a secret boyfriend? A dramatic career change?" Now, I could have shrugged it off. I could have said, "Oh, you know Nora. She's always got something up her sleeve." But I didn't. Instead, I leaned forward, my voice dropping conspiratorially. "Actually," I said, dragging the word out for effect, "she's been trying to quit her job." Jenna raised an eyebrow. "What? She loves that museum gig." I glanced around as if confirming no one else in the diner could hear us. "Not anymore. She says it's toxic. Her boss is a control freak, and the place is bleeding money. But here's the kicker. She's been writing a fantasy novel in secret. Like, full-on dragons and warring kingdoms." "Shut up," Maya whispered, delighted. "Little Miss Career-Oriented is writing smutty dragon fiction?" "It's not smut," I said, laughing, though Nora's flushed face when I'd caught her hunched over her laptop last week suggested otherwise. "But yeah, she's dead serious about it. She even said she might pitch it to publishers once it's done." Kyle whistled. Plot twist. I thought she'd be the last person to ditch a steady paycheck for, like, vibes. I waved a fry like a wand. Turns out, the museum life isn't as glamorous as it looks. And who knows? Maybe she'll be the next George R.R. Martin. The conversation shifted after that. Jenna talked about her roommate's weird late-night cooking habits, Kyle debated the ethics of regifting, and Maya started a long rant about people who dog-ear books. But I felt good. Everyone had laughed, and it wasn't like I'd said anything bad about Nora. If anything, I'd painted her as ambitious, creative, even brave. No harm, no foul. Until Monday evening. I was home, scrolling on my phone while a pot of water boiled for pasta, when my screen lit up with Nora's name. I answered casually, "Hey, what's up?" Silence. Then, "Did you tell your friends about my book?" Her voice was tight, like a rope about to snap. My stomach flipped, but I tried to keep my tone light. Oh, yeah. It came up. Why? There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Because Maya texted me. She said she can't wait to read my smutty dragon novel. I winced. Okay, first of all, I never called it smut. That was her interpretation. And second, it's not a big deal. They're my friends, Nora. They're not going to blab it to the world. You mean the way you did? She shot back. Jesus, you know I haven't even told Mom and Dad about this, right? And now your coworkers are joking about it like it's some kind of office gossip. They're not joking about it. I protested. They're excited for you. I was just sharing something cool about you. Why is that such a crime? Because it's my story, Olivia, she snapped. Mine to tell, or not to tell. You don't get to decide that for me. I opened my mouth, then closed it, caught off guard by the raw anger in her voice. I didn't mean to hurt you, I said finally. I thought it was harmless. Yeah, well, it's not harmless to me, she said, her tone cold now. Do you know how terrifying it is to put yourself out there creatively? How hard it is to even admit I want to write, let alone show anyone. And now, thanks to you, I feel like some kind of joke before I've even had a chance to finish the damn thing. I clenched the phone tighter, a flash of irritation bubbling up. Okay, I get that you're mad, but seriously, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's not like I posted your first draft on Reddit or something. I just told a couple of people who, by the way, think you're awesome for doing this. And you don't think that matters? That the context matters? You've turned this thing I was barely brave enough to do into a circus act for your buddies to laugh about. And then you don't even apologize. You just keep justifying it. I was about to argue back, but she hung up before I could. The dead silence on the line felt heavier than it should have, like a gavel coming down in judgment. For the rest of the night, her words looped in my head. I couldn't decide if she was right or if she was being overly sensitive. I mean, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have said anything, but I'd only done it because I thought it was a cool tidbit about her. And it wasn't like I told the whole world. Just 3 people she'd probably never even see again. Still, the way she'd said, "It's my story," gnawed at me. Maybe I'd underestimated how vulnerable she felt, how much courage it took for her to even write in secret. But even as guilt crept in, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was blowing things out of proportion. It wasn't like I'd been malicious. It was just a piece of news, right? So, now I'm stuck here, replaying it all in my head, wondering if I'm a jerk for sharing, or if she's just being too sensitive. I didn't mean to hurt her. I honestly thought I was being supportive. AITA? The day began with a single tap on the window pane. At first, I thought it was just a leaf, but when I looked closer, there it was, a small, blue bird with a crest of feathers that stood straight up, staring directly at me. Its eyes, piercing and too human, seemed to say, "Are you coming or not?" It wasn't unusual for birds to show up outside my apartment, but this one was different. It didn't flinch when I moved closer. It was waiting. I hadn't planned to leave the house that morning. My calendar was blissfully blank, the sort of day I cherished because they came so rarely. I had envisioned hours of reading, maybe sketching by the window, nothing too ambitious. But the bird tapped again, insistent, as if it had somewhere far more important for me to be. And so, against my better judgment, I grabbed my coat. The bird fluttered away as I stepped outside, but not far. It waited, perched on a lamppost at the corner of the street. I followed it, feeling more ridiculous with every step. It was just a bird, I told myself. Yet something in its strange confidence, its unrelenting stare, pulled me forward. We crossed the city in a series of stops and starts, the bird always perching just far enough to keep me moving. First to the edge of the park, then down a narrow alleyway I'd never noticed before. The alley was lined with old brick buildings that seemed to lean inward, casting long shadows despite the morning sun. The bird landed on a rusted fire escape and chirped once before diving into an open window. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. I hesitated, looking around to see if anyone else had noticed the bird's bizarre behavior. But the alley was empty, and the quiet was oppressive, as if the city had held its breath. My curiosity overrode my better instincts, and I climbed the creaky metal ladder, swinging myself through the window. Inside, the room was dim and smelled faintly of old books and something earthy, like moss. The bird was waiting on a wooden table in the center of the room, surrounded by strange objects. A silver compass spinning in slow circles, a glass jar filled with shimmering blue liquid, and an hourglass with sand that flowed upward. On the wall hung an enormous, intricate map, but it wasn't of any place I recognized. The continents were misshapen, the oceans dotted with symbols I couldn't decipher. "Welcome," a voice said, startling me. I turned to see an old man seated in a worn leather armchair in the corner. His clothes looked like they belonged to another century. Buttoned vest, pocket watch chain glinting against the dim light. But his face was unlined, almost ageless. "Who are you?" I asked, instinctively stepping back toward the window. "The better question," he said, leaning forward, "is who are you?" His eyes gleamed with a mischief that made me uneasy. "I don't understand." "Of course you don't," he interrupted. "Not yet. But you followed the bird, didn't you? That's the first step. The map only shows itself to those who are ready." "Ready for what?" "To choose," he said simply, gesturing toward the table. "The compass will take you to the place you've always wanted to go, but you'll never return. The jar will grant you knowledge, but at a cost. You'll forget who you were." "The hourglass?" "Ah, that's the tricky one. Turn it, and you'll relive the best moment of your life forever. But time will stop for everything else." I stared at the objects, each one glowing faintly in the dim room. My mouth was dry, my mind racing. "I didn't ask for this," I said, stepping back. "I don't want any of it." "Ah," the man said, leaning back with a faint smile. "That too is a choice." The bird chirped again, and I looked at it, perched so calmly on the table. It tilted its head, as if to say, "Well?" I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in indecision. The weight of the choices before me felt unbearable, and yet I was drawn to the table, to the map, to the strange and impossible promises they held. In the end, I reached for, well, that's the thing, isn't it? I could tell you what I chose, but that would ruin the mystery. And some things, I think, are better left unsaid. All I'll tell you is this. When I finally left the room, the world outside had changed. Or maybe I had. It started with a knock on the door that didn't belong in my quiet, predictable Thursday evening. I opened it to find my childhood friend, Marcy, standing there, soaked from the rain, clutching a suitcase in one hand and a potted cactus in the other. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks like little rivers. "Surprise," she said, offering a sheepish smile. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the infamous incident at her wedding, when she caught me making fun of the monogrammed napkins. I thought we were done after that. Yet, here she was, standing on my porch like no time had passed. Before I could process, she spilled her story. Her partner had left her, she'd lost her job, and her lease had ended on the same cruel day. She needed a place to stay, just for a little while, just until she could sort things out. I hesitated, but the rain, the cactus, and the faint glimmer of our shared history softened me. "Come in," I said, already wondering if I'd regret it. At first, it was nice, nostalgic even. Marcy filled my apartment with stories of her whirlwind life. Her failed attempts at stand-up comedy, the pet iguana she'd accidentally released into the wild, the time she almost got cast as an extra in a zombie movie but refused to shave her head for the role. She was like a hurricane of chaos, but an entertaining one, and I convinced myself this would be fine. I even gave her the spare key, which felt generous but necessary. I made an effort to make her comfortable. I stocked the fridge with oat milk for her lattes, set up the guest room with fresh sheets, and even helped her spruce up her resume. She was giddy about job hunting, telling me about all the places she'd applied, until I realized she'd only submitted applications to jobs like fortune cookie writer or luxury hammock tester. "Dream big," she said with a wink. Marcy's quirks started small. She had a habit of moving my furniture, claiming she was improving the feng shui. "Your couch was blocking the energy flow," she explained, though it mostly blocked my path to the kitchen. She also insisted on cooking dinner to repay my kindness. This would have been lovely if her culinary experiments hadn't involved things like beetroot lasagna or pineapple curry pancakes. I ate them with forced enthusiasm, though my stomach wasn't as forgiving. Then came the cactus. Its name was Frank, and Marcy treated it like a sentient being. She moved Frank around the apartment daily so he could soak in different vibes. I'd find him on my desk, in the bathroom, or once in my bed. When I tried to set some ground rules, no plants in shared spaces, for starters, Marcy laughed like I just told her the moon was made of cheese. Frank doesn't follow rules, she said. The turning point came one Saturday morning. I woke up to find my kitchen transformed into what could only be described as a surrealist nightmare. Marcy had attempted to paint her feelings on the walls using neon spray paint she'd found at a discount store. The words, "Freedom is chaos," dripped across the backsplash in jagged letters next to a poorly rendered portrait of Frank. My jaw dropped. What the hell is this? I shouted, gesturing wildly at the fluorescent mess. Marcy, still in her paint-splattered pajamas, grinned. It's art. You said I should express myself? I said you should express yourself in your journal, not on my walls. I grabbed a sponge and started scrubbing, but the paint didn't budge. Marcy watched, unbothered, munching on a slice of leftover beet lasagna. Over the next week, things escalated. She started hosting vision board nights with her friends, who brought glitter, glue guns, and an alarming amount of wine. They stayed until 2 a.m., leaving my apartment looking like a craft store had exploded. When I asked her to tone it down, she looked at me with wide eyes and said, "You're killing my creative spirit." One night, I found her in my room, rummaging through my closet. "What are you doing?" I asked, horrified. "I needed a jacket," she said casually, holding up my favorite leather one. "We're about the same size, right?" "Marcy, no," I said firmly. "This isn't working. You're not respecting my space." Her face darkened. "Wow, I didn't realize you were this uptight." "I'm not uptight, I stopped myself. This isn't about me. It's about boundaries." "Oh, I see," she said, crossing her arms. "You're one of those people who only helps others when it's convenient for you. Good to know." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd bent over backward to accommodate her, and now she was making me feel like the villain. "Marcy, you need to start looking for another place," I said, trying to stay calm. "I can't keep doing this." She let out a dramatic sigh and muttered something about how people were so selfish these days. That night, she locked herself in the guest room, and I heard her having a one-sided conversation with Frank. The next morning, she was gone. She left behind a cryptic note that read, "Don't worry, Frank and I will find a place where our art is appreciated." She also left the spray-painted walls, a sink full of glitter-coated dishes, and a lingering sense of guilt I couldn't quite shake. So, AITA? When Danny floated the idea of getting a hot tub for the backyard, I thought they were joking. I laughed, took a sip of my coffee, and said, "Sure, right after we buy that private island you've been eyeing." But Danny didn't laugh. They were holding their laptop, and they spun it around to show me. The screen glowed with a photo of a sleek, cedar-lined hot tub, surrounded by happy couples sipping champagne under string lights. "Picture it," Danny said, eyes wide with excitement. "Friday nights. You, me, some bubbly, stars overhead, pure bliss." I squinted at the price. "That much bliss costs about as much as our savings account." Danny scoffed. "We deserve a splurge. It's been a rough year, and this is self-care on another level." I try to keep my cool. What's wrong with the self-care we already have? Like sitting in the backyard with a beer? Danny rolled their eyes. "A beer and a lawn chair isn't exactly magical, is it?" "Magical or not, I like the lawn chair just fine." And the idea of draining our savings on something so unnecessary made my skin crawl. I had other plans, big plans. We'd been talking about replacing the water heater for months, and every time I took a lukewarm shower, I felt like I was being personally disrespected by the universe. I tried to shift the conversation. "What about fixing the water heater first? We can talk about the hot tub later." Danny's face fell. "The water heater? Seriously? That's your counteroffer to a freaking hot tub?" "It's practical," I said, "and it won't drain our savings, literally or figuratively." And just like that, the hot tub became the great divide. For weeks, we danced around the issue. Danny kept dropping hints, sending me pictures of hot tubs and idyllic settings. I countered by emailing them quotes for water heater replacements with subject lines like, "Our future, but warmer." One night, I came home to find the backyard transformed. Danny had strung up fairy lights and set up our camping chairs around a kiddie pool filled with lukewarm water. They'd even thrown in a handful of plastic rose petals. "What's this?" I asked, already bracing for the punchline. "It's a demo," Danny said, lounging in one of the chairs with a glass of wine. "So you can see how magical it could be." I couldn't help but laugh. "Magical, huh? Pretty sure our neighbors are gonna call the HOA on us." "They're just jealous," Danny said, grinning. The thing was, I could see their vision. I could imagine us in a real hot tub, unwinding after work, escaping the grind of everyday life. But then I'd think about the cost, about how long we'd work to save up, how much security that money represented, and my stomach would knot up all over again. Still, I decided to play along. The next weekend, I planned a surprise. While Danny was out, I bought one of those portable propane water heaters and set it up with a big metal washtub in the backyard. When they got home, I had the tub filled with steaming water and a cooler of drinks at the ready. "Ta-da," I said, gesturing grandly. "Hot tub 1.0. Danny burst out laughing. "You're ridiculous." "Maybe," I said, climbing in and wincing as the metal creaked under my weight. "But I'm also practical." For a moment, it felt like we were on the same page. We sat there, sipping beers in our makeshift spa, and talked about everything but the argument we'd been having. But then Danny leaned back, gazed at the stars, and said, "This is nice. But imagine if it didn't look like we were squatting in someone else's yard." And we were back to square one. The tension built over the next few days. We tried to compromise. Danny suggested financing the hot tub, and I countered with a smaller, cheaper model. But nothing felt right. Danny wanted an experience. I wanted security. It felt like we were speaking different languages. One night, after another frustrating conversation, I sat down and made a spreadsheet. It listed the pros and cons of both options, complete with projected costs and timelines. I emailed it to Danny, thinking maybe seeing the numbers laid out would help. The next morning, Danny slid a note across the breakfast table. It read, "Hot tubs don't fit in spreadsheets. Let's talk tonight." That evening, Danny had me sit on the couch and close my eyes. They walked me through a scenario. We're in the backyard. It's winter. The air is crisp, and steam rises from the hot tub as we sink into the water. We're laughing, unwinding, feeling alive. Then Danny switched gears. We're in the bathroom, shivering as another cold shower fails to rinse the shampoo from my hair. "Which one feels better?" Danny asked. I opened my eyes. The hot tub, obviously, but it's not that simple. "Maybe it doesn't have to be so complicated either," Danny said softly. That night, we had the most honest conversation we'd had in months. We talked about why the hot tub mattered so much to Danny, how it wasn't just about luxury, but about creating something special in our lives. And I admitted that my obsession with practicality wasn't just about money. It was about feeling in control when so much in life felt uncertain. In the end, we made a deal. We'd split our savings. Half would go to a water heater, and the other half to a down payment on a hot tub. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it felt fair. The water heater was installed first, and for weeks, I reveled in the glory of scalding hot showers. Then, one chilly autumn evening, the hot tub arrived. Danny was ecstatic, practically vibrating with excitement as we watched it fill. That night, as we sank into the steaming water under the stars, Danny turned to me with a smug grin. "Admit it, this is magical." I leaned back, let the warmth seep into my bones, and smiled. "Yeah, it kind of is. But sometimes, when I check the bank balance, I wonder, AITA? When you turn 33, people tell you it's just another birthday. But for me, it was more than that. It was the year I finished my first novel. A decade in the making, countless nights of coffee-fueled writing, and 2 very ugly crying sessions over plot holes. I wasn't just celebrating my birthday. I was celebrating the launch of my book. To mark the occasion, I decided to host an intimate reading/birthday party at my favorite indie bookstore, the Raven's Nook. The place was perfect. Vintage bookshelves, mismatched chairs, and a faint smell of old paper and ink. I spent weeks preparing, selecting passages to read, designing the invitations, and even commissioning custom bookmarks for my guests. The RSVPs trickled in. My college roommate Sophie, my weirdly competitive cousin Max, my coworkers, and a few writer friends. And then there was Julia. Julia and I were friends in that slippery, unbalanced way where one person is always a little more invested. We met in a creative writing class years ago, and while I went the long-haul route of slow drafts and rejection letters, Julia had tried her hand at everything: poetry, screenplays, even an Etsy shop where she sold literary-themed candles. Nothing ever stuck, but she had this charisma that made people root for her, including me. The night of the party, the bookstore looked magical. String lights dangled above the bookshelves, casting a warm glow over the room. My novel, The Moon's Other Face, was displayed on a little table with a local author spotlight sign. The guests filtered in, hugging me, admiring the setup, and commenting on how much effort I'd put in. Julia arrived fashionably late, her entrance as dramatic as ever. She wore this sweeping red coat and carried a glossy black tote bag that screamed expensive. "Darling," she exclaimed, arms outstretched. "Look at you. This is incredible." "Thanks," I said, smiling. "I'm so glad you could make it." "Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world," she said, planting a kiss on my cheek. She glanced around the room, taking in the details. "You've really outdone yourself. Very you." At the time, I didn't register the faint edge in her tone. The reading began, and I felt a knot in my stomach as I took my place at the podium. But as soon as I started reading, the words flowed like they belonged to someone else, someone more confident. I read 2 passages, one funny, one poignant, and the applause was warm and genuine. As I stepped down, Julia clapped the loudest, then raised her hand dramatically. "Excuse me, everyone," she called out, silencing the murmurs. I froze. "I just have to say," Julia began, standing up from her chair, "I am so proud of our dear friend here. What an achievement, truly." She beamed at me, but her voice carried the kind of energy that made me bristle. "Thank you, Julia," I said cautiously. "And, speaking of achievements," she continued, her eyes sparkling, "I have a little surprise to share." She reached into her glossy tote bag and pulled out, of all things, a manuscript. I wasn't planning on saying anything tonight, but this feels like the perfect moment. I've just finished my first novel. The room buzzed with murmurs of congratulations. Julia held up her pages dramatically, the gesture so theatrical I half expected a spotlight to descend from the ceiling. "It's called Echoes of Fire," she announced. "A modern Gothic tale with a twist. I brought copies of the first chapter if anyone's interested." For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My cheeks burned as Julia handed out printed chapters like party favors, her voice bubbling with excitement. The bookstore owner, clearly uncomfortable, glanced at me. "Shall we, move on to the next activity?" But Julia was unstoppable. "Oh, and one more thing," she said, laughing. "I've decided to self-publish, so if anyone wants to be on my email list for updates, let me know." It was like she had commandeered my night, turned it into her impromptu book launch. The bookmarks I designed, the novel I'd poured my soul into, they suddenly felt small and unimportant next to Julia's whirlwind of charm and ambition. I tried to stay gracious. I really did. But as Julia handed yet another chapter to one of my coworkers, I snapped. "Wow, Julia," I said loudly. The room quieted, all eyes on me. "This is a lot." Julia blinked at me, her smile faltering. "What do you mean?" "Well," I said, my voice sharp, "it's just impressive how you've managed to turn my book launch into your book launch. Really, bravo." The room went still. Julia's eyes narrowed. I didn't realize sharing my excitement was such a problem. Aren't we supposed to support each other as writers? Support? I laughed, though it came out bitter. "You mean hijack? Because that's what this feels like. I've spent years working on this, Julia. Years. And you couldn't let me have one night?" Julia bristled, clutching her manuscript to her chest. "I wasn't trying to overshadow you. I thought you'd be happy for me. But clearly, Your ego can't handle a little friendly competition. It's not competition, I snapped. It's basic respect. You don't walk into someone else's celebration and make it about you. It's tacky, Julia. Plain and simple. The air was heavy with tension. People avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their wine glasses or the spines of nearby books. Well, Julia said finally, her voice cold, I guess I misread the room. Sorry for thinking you'd be happy for me. My mistake. She grabbed her bag and left, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The rest of the night was awkward. People tried to rally, complimenting my reading and flipping through my book, but the energy was gone. The party fizzled out early, and I went home with a pit in my stomach. Now, days later, I keep replaying the scene in my head. Did I overreact? Should I have let her have her moment, even if it came at the expense of mine? Or was I right to call her out for stealing the spotlight? AITA? I was in my grandmother's kitchen, a small room that always smelled faintly of lavender and burnt sugar, even when she wasn't baking. She had her back to me, bent over the table, intently slicing something with the precision of a jeweler. It was just another Saturday morning at her house, or at least it should have been, but today was different. I'd driven 2 hours to visit her, and not just for her famous cherry pie. Something had been gnawing at me for weeks, a whisper of worry I couldn't ignore. Grandma, I said, forcing lightness into my voice. What are you working on now? Another one of your secret recipes? She glanced at me over her shoulder, her gray hair glinting in the sunlight. Not quite, dear. Just cutting up some fruit. You'll see soon enough. The kitchen table was covered in a mosaic of papers, jars of herbs, and handwritten notes. It was her latest project, the elixir, as she'd started calling it, with the kind of gravity you'd reserve for a Nobel Prize. Grandma had always been eccentric, but lately, her experiments had taken on a sharper edge. A cure for inflammation, a tonic for memory loss, an oil for arthritis that would put the pharmaceutical companies out of business. At first, I'd admired her zeal. It gave her something to focus on after Grandpa passed, something that lit up her days. But then came the packages, bizarre ingredients ordered from obscure websites, some of which I had to Google just to believe they were real. Dragon's blood resin, smilax root, dried jellyfish powder. A few weeks ago, she mentioned something about testing her concoctions at the community center potluck. That was when my unease turned into full-blown alarm. Grandma, I began cautiously, sitting down at the table. Can we talk for a second? About all this? She straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. Her smile was warm but wary. Of course, dear. What's on your mind? I took a deep breath. It's about the elixir. I know you've put a lot of work into it, and I think it's amazing how much you've learned. But do you think it's safe to give it to other people? I mean, you're not a doctor, and some of these ingredients... Her face darkened, the warmth evaporating like a summer rain. I've done my research, she said firmly, her voice like a snapped thread. I know exactly what I'm doing, better than half the so-called experts out there. I'm not saying you don't, I replied quickly, holding up my hands. What if something goes wrong? What if someone has a reaction or gets sick? I'm worried, that's all. She let out a short laugh, but it wasn't her usual laugh. It was sharp and hollow, like a glass breaking in an empty room. Worried. That's what everyone says when they want to stop you from doing something. They're worried. You sound just like your father. That stung more than I expected it to. My dad had always been the practical one, the one who tried to keep her grounded. But he had a way of talking to her that felt dismissive, and I'd promised myself I wouldn't make the same mistake. I'm not trying to stop you, I said, softer this time. I just think maybe it would be good to test things more, with a professional, like a scientist. Her eyes narrowed. Do you think I haven't tested it? I've been taking it myself for weeks. And look at me, I'm fine. Better than fine. I felt sharper than I have in years. I couldn't argue with that. She did seem sharper, more energetic. But the stakes were different when it was just her. When other people were involved, it was a whole other story. What if, I started, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. I don't need a lecture, darling. I know you mean well, but you don't understand. You young people always think you have the answers because you can Google anything. But there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Her words hit their mark, and I felt my resolve wobble. She wasn't wrong. Her instincts had always been sharp, her intuition almost uncanny. But this wasn't intuition. It was chemistry, biology, liability. "I do trust you, Grandma," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's why I'm saying this. Because if something happened to you, or to someone else, I'd never forgive myself." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she might soften. But then she turned away, her shoulders stiff with anger. "I don't need saving, sweetheart. I've been taking care of myself long before you were born." The conversation ended there, a cold wall dropping between us that neither of us tried to scale. I stayed for lunch, though the food tasted like ash, and I left soon after. She didn't hug me goodbye. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my dad. Someone at the community center had a bad reaction to one of her teas. Not life-threatening, thank God, but enough to land them in urgent care. My dad took her car keys away, and she stopped talking to him altogether. When I called her, she didn't pick up. I thought about going back to see her, about apologizing even though I wasn't sure what for. But the truth was, I didn't know if she'd ever forgive me for pointing out what she didn't want to see. And worse, I didn't know if I'd ever forgive myself for not being able to make her listen. AITA? It started with an argument over socks. Socks. Not who left the dishes in the sink for the 3rd day in a row, or whose turn it was to vacuum. Just socks. Mine were, apparently, too aggressive for the vibe of the character, or so Nina said. "How can socks be aggressive?" I asked, holding up the offending pair. A mismatched set of orange stripes and purple polka dots. "They're just quirky." "Exactly," Nina replied, her tone heavy with the kind of exasperation that only comes from loving someone enough to hate their socks. "The character's not quirky. He's supposed to be introspective, thoughtful. These scream birthday clown in an identity crisis." We were supposed to be working on a stop-motion film, a passion project we dreamed up over takeout on one of those nights where everything seems possible because you're sleep-deprived and buzzing on too much caffeine. I don't remember how we landed on stop-motion. I think Nina had said something like, "Why not do something nobody else is doing?" And I'd replied, "Sure. How hard can it be?" Spoiler. It's very hard. The premise of the film was solid, though. A tiny, sad robot wandering a vast, post-apocalyptic wasteland, searching for a place to belong. Simple, elegant, poignant. Or it could have been if Nina and I weren't actively trying to sabotage each other. At first, things were fine. Magical, even. We'd cleared a corner of our tiny apartment and converted it into a makeshift studio with lights, a camera, and an absurd number of tiny props we'd painstakingly crafted out of clay and scrap materials. Nina had even taught herself how to sew, creating miniature costumes for our protagonist, whom we'd named Tin. But by the 3rd week, the cracks started to show. I thought Tin's movements should be slow and deliberate, emphasizing his loneliness. Nina thought he should have a clumsy, almost childlike gait. "He's curious," she'd said, rearranging his tiny, articulated arms. "He's exploring." "He's a robot in the middle of an existential crisis," I argued, repositioning the arms back to their original place. "He's not frolicking through the apocalypse." Frolicking? Are you even listening to yourself? It was a back-and-forth dance of passive aggression that would have been funny if it weren't so exhausting. I'd spend hours setting up a shot, meticulously adjusting the lighting to capture the melancholy mood I envisioned, only to find that Nina had swapped out the gray backdrops for pastel gradients because, and I quote, "the contrast makes the story pop." She retaliated by accusing me of overthinking every tiny detail, which, okay, maybe I was, but wasn't that the whole point of stop motion? Details? By the time we got to the big emotional climax, Tin finding an abandoned, overgrown garden and realizing that life can flourish even after devastation, we were barely speaking. Nina wanted bright, lush greens and sunlight streaming through the ruins. I wanted a haunting, twilight glow to underscore the bittersweet nature of the moment. "This is supposed to be hopeful," she said, folding her arms as I adjusted the light. "It is hopeful," I snapped. "It's just not saccharine." Nina sighed. "You know what? Fine. Do it your way. Fine. Fine. I don't know why we thought we could work like that. Maybe it was sheer stubbornness. Maybe we both secretly thought the other would crack first. Either way, the final product was an unwatchable mess. The lighting was inconsistent, the pacing was weird, and poor Tin alternated between stumbling around like a drunk toddler and moving so slowly he might as well have been in slow motion. We didn't even finish the ending. I think we both knew it wasn't worth it. After weeks of pouring everything into this project, all we had to show for it was an unfinished robot soap opera and a giant pile of broken clay limbs and torn backdrops. The night we decided to scrap it, we sat in silence for what felt like hours, surrounded by the wreckage of our ambitions. Finally, Nina broke the silence. "I think," she said carefully, "we're just too different." I stared at her, unsure if she was talking about the project or us. Maybe both. "Yeah," I said finally. "Maybe." We didn't really talk about it after that. The props went into a box, the camera went back into storage, and life went on. We stopped fighting over little things like socks and started fighting over big things, like where our relationship was headed, or if it was headed anywhere at all. A month later, Nina moved out. I found the box of props while cleaning one day and decided to watch the footage, just to see if it was as bad as I remembered. It was worse. Tin's journey wasn't poignant or bittersweet or even quirky. It was incoherent. A robot wandering a wasteland for no reason, clumsily animated by two people who couldn't decide what they wanted from him or each other. Still, there was something about Tin that stuck with me. Something raw and vulnerable. Maybe it was the way his little head tilted when he looked up at the ruined sky, like he was asking a question he knew would never be answered. I felt like that too, watching him. I thought about calling Nina to tell her. Maybe she'd feel it too, if she saw it. Maybe it wasn't all a waste. But I didn't call. I just put the box back in the closet and sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, wondering if we'd ever figure out how to finish our story, wondering if I'd been wrong about the socks. "Ida?"